Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we talk to growers from across the greenhouse industry about market trends, innovation, their biggest challenges and opportunities, and more. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. Last month, AmericanHort held its Impact Washington Fly-In Summit, where over 3 days, more than 140 participants from 25 states met with lawmakers and their staffs to discuss their biggest priorities, including labor, the upcoming Farm Bill, horticulture research funding, and more. In this episode, I talked to two of the growers who attended the event. Alan Jones of Manor Farm in Maryland, who's been a longtime attendee of Impact Washington, and first-timer Jonathan Jasinski of Microplant Nurseries in Oregon. We discussed each of their immediate takeaways, the importance of meeting with lawmakers both on Capitol Hill and on your own farm, and why advocacy plays a critical role in the future of the floriculture industry. Here's our conversation. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining me today. And before we get into Impact Washington and some of the key issues that you both talked about, I want to give our audience just a sense of a little bit of background on each of your companies. So, Alan Jones, why don't we start with you and kind of tell me a little bit about your company and then maybe why you went to Impact Washington this year.
Okay, Alan Jones. I'm president of Manor Farm. We're a 100-acre tree nursery in Maryland. We're just north of Baltimore. We also have a propagation division, and we have a substantial landscape distribution center. So we work very closely with landscapers in the Mid-Atlantic area, and particularly in Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia and on the eastern shore of Maryland.
Okay.
And I've been attending AmericanHort events like the Impact Washington for many, many years. In fact, I've been going to these events now probably for, 25, 30 years. And because I think they are important, it's important to engage with the regulators in DC and also at a state level, because you never quite know when they have an impact on your business or the industry. So this is as much to give back to the industry as it is for a personal benefit from Manorview.
Okay, great. Jonathan, why don't you tell us about Microplant Nurseries?
Yeah, sure. So Jonathan Jasinski from Microplant Nurseries. We're out here in Jervis, Oregon, so the other side on the other coast of Allen, and we are a tissue culture nursery. We've produced stage 2 and stage 3 unrooted and rooted micro cuttings for growers all over the United States, but those plants may ship all over the world. We produce millions of these little tiny plants for like the plankton and the fish food chain of plants. We get them started for greenhouses, and those plants will eventually make their way into liner trays, and that's what we do. We are your lab, so you don't have to build one. So a lot of people come to us looking for, they might only have 200 or a few hundred plants, and they want 20,000 or even 2 million. So that's what we do.
Okay. Couple of diverse perspective you guys bring to the conversation then. I like that.
Yeah. And I'm brand new to the advocacy scene. I was a part of the Leadership Academy through HRI, and it was a wonderful experience. And a big component of that was advocacy. And that has never been in my wheelhouse before. I mean, in any way, shape, form. So the first time I got exposed to that was through the Leadership Academy, actually visiting Washington. And the takeaway I took home from that was, these legislators are really accessible to you if you ask, or how to get in, or you visit them and they want to hear your stories. And so I thought I'd take them up on it this year, especially with how, you see how crazy Washington can be in the news. It's like, okay, what is that place really like, And so it was important for me to just go see what the process was like. And I'm really glad I did it. It was a fantastic experience. And I'm really glad I went through with it.
Good. And I know we're having this conversation for those listening in mid-October. And I guess it's lucky in hindsight that you guys went there in September, because if it had been scheduled for this week, I think it would have been a little bit of a different story.
I got to go to a few museums, which was really nice. So I wouldn't have been able to do that if we would have gone now. So the timing was great.
Yeah, I guess sightseeing in Washington, D.C. is never a bad thing. So it would give you a chance for that at least. The whole idea of advocacy, as I talk to growers in this market, obviously, growers like to talk about new technology, new varieties, new ways of growing plants the right way. Advocacy is a different topic, I think. It seems that, that there can be some reluctance at times to, willingness to speak to lawmakers about the issues that are important to you. Can you guys all just give each of your perspectives on why you see advocacy as being something that's so important to this industry?
Well, I think it's important at all levels of government. It's not just in DC, because you can start to become more comfortable at a state level, and whether it's policies which are being directed at the industry at the state level, or even at the county level, and or the federal level, because you never quite know when some of these rule changes are going to affect your business.
Sure.
And in many cases, there's very few people who are legislators who understand our industry. And I think it's often said that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So you need to be engaged, because you never know when rules are going to change that could affect whether it's water use, or whether it's pesticide use, or whether it's labor. There's so many parts of the industry that can be regulated that we as an industry need to step up. And it used to be, years ago, it was very easy to fly under the radar, but the industry now is of a substantial size, and it's not so easy. And as anyone here, like at AmericanHort, will tell you, the growers, the people in the industry, can tell our story better than anybody else. So that's really the main reason why it's important for people who are involved in the industry to go down to DC or go to your state capital when the topics that need to be addressed, and get involved, really.
Sure.
Yeah, Alan, you took the words right out of my mouth. I've heard that same phrase, and I was going to use it here, but it couldn't be truer. I mean, if they don't know your story, they're not going to even know what to advocate for when they're voting on whatever issue may be on the floor. And so, being able to tell your story, some of these legislators, when you say nursery, they're thinking you take care of babies. You know what I mean? They don't realize, plant nursery. Tell me about that. What does that look like? And, being able to at least, even if you have 2 minutes to tell your pitch about what's important to you, the hope is that will stick with them when they're thinking about these policies that are coming through their door. And, how is that going to affect my constituency? And if you're not there to tell that story, they're not going to get it. I mean, it's certainly more valuable to be in their office talking with a legislator than, ranting about it online. They're actually listening to you and hearing you. And even if you don't get a meeting with the legislator themselves, if you're talking with the staffers, sometimes they are the policy experts that the legislator looks to. So you might not get a meeting with the representative, but at least you're telling the people who are the policy experts in maybe your field. And so it's wonderful to be able to tell that. And it makes it so much easier. I mean, as a newcomer to the advocacy front, it was just tell your story and what's affecting you. And that's easy, right? Like, you live it every single day. So being able to have that kind of forum was really cool. You learn about all this stuff in like high school, civics and all of that. And then actually seeing the wheels turn in person and being a part of it, it's pretty dang cool.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and from your perspective, Jonathan, as a first-time attendee, how did you prepare, and then how did AmericanHort help prepare you so that you can feel more comfortable going into some of these discussions?
Yeah, at first I didn't know if I should be doing like a tremendous amount of homework, and how am I as a tissue culture grower going to know what the greenhouse industry needs for, certain issues that may be affecting them, but the reality is we're all affected by very similar issues. Workforce and labor, farm bills coming up for renewal, research dollars, and the supply chain, like tariffs, trade, transportation, all of that. We're all in the same boat. And so it's so overwhelming, or it can be, because there's so many different large topics there. You could spend hours on every single one of those. AmericanHort did a really good job at giving us, when we flew in, a binder. I mean, I got to give it up to Matt Micah, Rachel Pick, and Cameron Newberry. Did a wonderful job at making everyone feel, I think, very comfortable with what are the issues at hand that we need to talk about. And what do we need to be talking about in those conversations with legislators, and giving us a real brief overview. Yep. So homework wasn't really required because they prepared us. They set us up. They even gave us little inserts that we could keep in our jacket pocket to say, oh, that's right. I need to be talking about research as well. That's also affected me. If you found yourself like not knowing necessarily what to say, but we huddled up beforehand, and they separate everybody out in their respective states. So I was fortunate enough to attend with the Oregon Association of Nurseries, headed up by Jeff Stone. and he is a veteran. And so he was able to kind of navigate us around. And I didn't even have to like figure out, okay, where on the map should we be going? Where's the legislator's office? I kind of had a little bit of a lot of bit of help with Jeff knowing that and being able to just kind of lead us. So that's a little bit different experience than if you were going with maybe one or two growers from your state.
Yeah.
Even then, American Hort I feel sets you up very, very well to talk about those issues, feel confident enough to step in that office and go, okay, I know what I'm talking about, and who you're talking to as well. And they did a wonderful job at prepping us on that front.
Good. Awesome. Well, I know, and Alan, from your perspective, as somebody who's gone for several years now, does the process get easier? Do you tend to learn more from one year to the next about how to approach some of these conversations?
Yeah, it gets much easier. The first time you go, you're expecting to be very intimidating, which I think, as Jonathan May has explained, it's not nearly as intimidating as you think it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very eye-opening because until you've actually, walked into the office, you've met with the staffers, you've met maybe with a member, you really don't know what to expect. And those staffers are meeting with multiple people every day. And as you're entering an office, the people who are leaving could have been talking about the same topic, but from a completely different perspective.
Sure.
And so that's one of the reasons we just have to keep talking to these people, because the opposition to some of our, some of our industry have a very strong voice, and our industry tends to be very independent. And the more people we can get to attend these types of events and participate when American Hort sends out alerts. So once you've done it once or twice, it gets much easier. You start building up relationships with the staff, and that's something that becomes important, because you may not realize that their bosses don't know every topic, and the staff become the experts. And it's not uncommon for a member of staff to maybe comment about your discussion and say, well, I'll reach out to you later when my boss wants to know more information. Yeah. And I've had people actually a year or two later, they moved to a different office, email me and say, Alan, my boss is now on this committee and it relates to your industry. He wants to know what you think about this. Can you give me your opinion or put me in touch with somebody who can help? So you do build these long-term relationships with the staff, and in many cases, even with some of the members.
Okay. Well, and that relationship building has got to be critical, I think, because it's great to go in and have a one-time conversation, talk about what's important to you. But if they're not hearing from you again at that point, is the chance that's going to go in one ear and out the other, and they're going to focus on other things. But if you build that relationship, that sense of trust and that constant communication, that's got to pay off, I would think.
Yeah. And then, being just an hour and a half, 2 hours away from DC makes it much easier for me to go down there more frequently than many members.
Sure.
We've also made sent out the invite to members of our Maryland delegation to come and visit nurseries in Maryland.
Okay.
And we made a big emphasis this year of actually inviting them to the Manor trade show.
Okay.
It's right in their back door, and it got a very good reception, particularly from a number of staffers who say, well, we're into plants, we're into gardening. So I think we can get there for a morning. We can get our boss there probably, because it's in January, it's a little bit quieter. So we're hopeful actually we may be able to get some members of Congress actually to attend the trade show.
Well, and you bring up a good point there, Alan. I was thinking about it. So you're talking about in this case of Impact Washington, going to see lawmakers really on their home turf in their offices. When you flip it and you're inviting them to come to your facilities, and Jonathan, in your case, I don't know. I mean, if you've had the chance to invite people to see how things work at your operation, that informs them on what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and the challenges that you face every day.
Yeah, we had the opportunity through the Oregon Association of Nurseries. A few local legislators were able to come and tour our facilities here. But I always extended the invite to the federal legislators, like, hey, if you're in the state for whatever reason, please come by and see. Or if you're curious, kind of end with that note, allowing them to, keep that door open and, again, establish that relationship. Like Alan was saying, being on site, makes a world of difference. If they're able to actually be and feel and see your operation, that's even better. So yes, that's what we typically ended with when we were ending a conversation or closing it out, is like, hey, please come by our facility, please come by our operation and see us. We'd love to have you. And exchanging of business cards of some type with either the staff and then they would say, oh, thank you. And that was, again, it felt so open door, as opposed to like, it just feels so closed off if you're not actually in there and doing it. But it's really not. And I was asking, I forget who I was having a conversation with. I said, do governments normally like operate like this? Maybe you, Alan, who I was talking with, and in terms of like, is this normal? And they're like, this is actually very unique, like to the United States, where you can just get a meeting with at least the staffers of a legislator and have them listen to you and actually feel heard. People were furiously taking notes in most, if not all, of our meetings. And, where those notes end up, I'm not sure, but it certainly felt like we were making an impact when we were talking about what we were talking about.
But it's interesting. You never quite know where some of these connections go, because there's a lovely story from Oregon that there's a freshman congresswoman in Oregon who got to know a number of nurseries in her district.
Yeah.
And now she's the Secretary of Labor.
Wow. Okay.
Secretary Chavez Derima knows the nursery industry fairly well because of the connections she had when she was representing that district. And she probably knows the nursery industry better than anyone who is currently on the current administration's cabinet.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Well, go ahead, Jonathan.
I was going to say, and Alan, on that note too, a lot of the staffers are exceedingly young. You walk into an office and you're expecting like, a whole bunch of people in business suits. They're very wise. They've been around for decades. I mean, they're essentially kids in their 20s, right, Alan? Am I right? I mean, for most of the time, I was shocked. I was like, wow, these people are young. But the take home is treat these people with the utmost respect and courtesy, because they could end up somewhere down the line where you have no idea, and they could be greatly impacting your business a decade from now. But if you are pleasant through the process and you met them when they were a young, staffer, or when they were, in a junior position somewhere politically, and you build that relationship over time, man, that is really cool to like see that progress, just like the example Alan gave.
Well, it's funny because you talk about that, Jonathan, because way back when my wife was one of those people, she actually worked on Capitol Hill right out of college. So, and I got to see, I got to go into her offices and see, just as you said, our government is essentially run by people who are under the age of 35, and that's who you have most of your conversations with. So to be able to see the ins and outs of how things work it has to be really interesting. Jonathan, you had mentioned a few minutes ago some of the key topics that you talked about this year to lawmakers. I want to dig into some of those a little bit with just a couple of questions for each of you, really. Number one, was there one particular issue that stood out this year that you really wanted to try and focus on? And then how does the conversation differ when, you might be talking about something like immigration policy or tariffs that, may have more of a direct year-to-year effect versus something like research funding, where you may not see the impacts of a loss in research funding in the next year to even 5 years, but you go 10, 15 years down the road, and that's when you really start to see that. How did you approach some of those key issues, and anything that really stood out for you?
I think the number one issue was labor. Would you agree, Alan?
Yeah, that was the topic, the main topic. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that for us, I mean, in several different formats. One was the H-2A, H-2B visa program, so that's one avenue for labor, and then the other was keeping workforce that may already be established in your state. And what does that look like with ICE, ICE raids and all of that? Sometimes that can be not sometimes, it is a touchy subject, right? And we're wondering, okay, what's going to happen with that? Are they going to send in, ICE to our facilities, and what does that look like? And so kind of having a conversation about that with our legislators alleviated some fears, but also gave us an opportunity to kind of talk about like, hey, this is what's really top of mind for us, day in and day out.
H2A and H2B are the two main things that I tend to talk about when I go down to DC, because we use both programs. But also, depending on whether you're talking to Republicans or Democrats, you talk about it slightly differently.
Sure.
So in many cases, they're being brought up to speed with what's going on behind the scenes, because if they're not on any of the committees, they may not know what's being worked on. And so it's really very useful just to bring them up to speed, and also to see if you can get their support, so that when a bill is introduced, they will be supportive of it, because they know what work has been going on behind the scenes, and it's not a surprise. So that has a lot to do with it. The farm bill was another big issue. which obviously has some effect on us. And then the research funding was very topical, and also USDA funding, because there's been a lot of talk about reorganization. So those were the main key issues, and obviously tariffs were part of it as well. And again, depending on when you're talking to Democrats or Republicans, that discussion went slightly differently as to what their views were.
Sure. Just a side question then. So for each of your companies, as you're navigating through, tariff and cost issues, how is that affecting each of your companies' ability to plan for next year in terms of, budgeting, forecasting, and all that?
Yeah, so one major topic that I talked about when in legislators' offices was we were the recipient of a USDA REAP grant, and there was talks of maybe that funding getting pulled midway through the project that we've already started and put money down, and it is not a small sum of money. And so telling that story of like, hey, we have a contract with the U.S. government saying that once we complete this project, we should be getting some funding back. Are those monies going to be there? That's a huge concern. And so I was able to kind of talk with our legislators here and say, what is the story with that? And if they didn't know, one thing that I walked away from the conversation was they said, please reach out to us if you're having trouble with this.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got contact information, because sometimes you feel so helpless, like you're pulling up against Goliath, right? And you're like, who do I even contact about this issue? And so I actually had several staffers hand me their card and say, if you come up against this, please email us and let us know. We will work for you to try to get a solution. If we don't know the answer, we will try to get it for you. And that was super comforting. That was really unexpected, and also just like a really cool moment where I was like, wow, okay, they are genuinely trying to help with this potentially huge issue. And that was fantastic to be able to talk about that.
Sure. Alan, any thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I mean, he was just explaining how some of the little things of your business are being affected by tariffs, like burlap. As a B&B producer, tree producer, the burlap comes from India, and having to explain that to somebody in DC that this is something that's affected by tariffs, and you talk about wire baskets and the other parts of the industry, that they would have no idea that tariffs were even on those products, or that they would affect the business. So It was really, and they were asking, give us a list of items which are affecting your business. And AmericanHort's done a great job of actually supplying a lot of that information to the offices. So it's the unknown really, and just explaining how tariffs affect you in a way that they wouldn't even have thought of.
Okay. Well, and Jonathan, to your point too, I'll go back to the REAP program, for example. I think it's a good instance where people might look at government cutting funding in certain areas and think, okay, that no, it's a good thing because they're because they're less spending and all that. But to your point, when it hits home on something that you've already dedicated a lot of time and effort towards, that's a struggle that you have to face. Then I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And to say like, hey, we're going to be generating 32 homes worth of energy. That sounds like a pretty good use of tax dollars to take some burden off of the local utilities here. At least we think so. I mean, I'm kind of biased because we're doing the project, right? But it sounds like that's a worthwhile endeavor. To be able to kind of advocate for that is great.
Okay. Taking a step back now that you're past this year's, event, what were each of your, biggest takeaways from the conversations you had, and things that you might start looking to apply to how you approach, running your business and then working within the industry as you move forward from here?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways I took from this year's event was the number of people who attended, actually. There were over 140 people who registered for the AmericanHort event, and it was sold out. I mean, that in itself says something, that people are now realize the importance of getting engaged. And obviously there are concerns because the way the government seems to be going, you've got extremes on both sides of the aisle.
Sure.
So I think there's more interest in getting involved with some of these types of events. So I think that was one of the biggest takeaways. But I think everybody that we met with was interested to understand the business. Many of them heard the same story. H2A, H2B reform has been going on for years without much success. But the fact that you stay engaged, they appreciate the fact that you are engaged and that you do continue to come back and talk to them. And even if we're just making small improvements. It is helping the industry. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways was the number of people who from the industry who are now engaged.
Okay. Jonathan, what about you?
For me, it was, we come from a very blue state here in Oregon, and some of the conversations with legislators, they would say, well, do you have any Republican Congress people who are willing to work with us on this? And part of me was like, well, I would hope that's your guys' job, Senator, or, whoever I was talking with. But at the same time, they were kind of looking for an inroads potentially to working with somebody from the other side of the aisle. And for me, the light bulb kind of went off because we had conversations with, for example, the Texas Nursery and Landscape Association and members there. And it kind of opens those avenues being like, hey, are you talking to your legislators about the same stuff we are? Are they saying the same things? And hopefully maybe there would be some crosstalk there of getting other people on board. If we're talking about the same things in Oregon as they are in Texas regarding labor, for example, and the needs there, maybe we can get both sides working. That's an optimistic view, but potentially there's some inroads there.
Sure. I was looking at the attendee list, and I think one thing that stood out to me was, you had such a broad mix, not just by location, but you had growers, indoor growers and outdoor growers. You had product suppliers, you had advisors, you had so many different segments of the supply chain all there having the same types of discussions. That really stood out to me, I think.
Yeah, and hearing everybody's 2 to 5 minute spiel about their own business, I learned about growers that are neighbors, and I haven't heard that kind of spiel from them in the years that I've known them, right? But it was like, oh, cool, yeah, that's kind of their elevator pitch on what they do, and it kind of gave an even more robust view of my neighbors down the road. That was a cool kind of side perk of it all.
Okay. Well, and I'm sure you and Alan and Alan and Jonathan together, you guys can both converse now. And, if you have a question, reach out to each other and stay in touch for yourselves after this too, I would think. As you look ahead then, so the other question I have is advice that you might be willing to share with, others in this industry who, want to take that next step. How can they go by doing that? Why is it so important that they take that step? And any advice on kind of getting them out of what might be an uncomfortable zone for them?
Well, I think, as we said before, it's not as intimidating as most people think it will be. And you can start just taking small steps, either getting involved with your state association, because they're normally involved more with state legislators than DC, although there's a very close connection. But also the first way to start really is when you get an alert from AmericanHort or maybe some other association that's connected with the industry, asking you to send a letter, a pre-written form letter to your congressmen and senators about a particular topic. That's one way to start the process, because you start to understand the importance of doing this. Filling out that form with a name and address takes minutes, and then you automatically get sent to your congressman and to your senators. And that's an easy way to start. And then you start to understand the significance of doing this. And then as you get more comfortable with that, you can get more involved with your states and then more involved on a national level.
Okay. Jonathan?
Yeah, and I would just add to that there's a wonderful team at AmericanHort that is behind you, and this is what they do. So they set you up for success. At no point in the experience that I feel like I was unprepared or inadequately educated on what issues we were talking about. A lot of that all of it was facilitated by the staff at AmericanHort. And so if you're a part of that organization, you already have a built-in inroads to being able to talk about all of these issues, and they make it easy for you to do so.
Sure.
And I'd lean on that a lot. And like Alan said, you might get an email about a form letter, and it might feel like you're not doing much in that capacity, but it does make a difference, especially when you've got, several hundred individuals, maybe up thousands of individuals saying the same thing over and over again. That is kind of like hey, this is an important thing to this segment of the industry. So participating and being a part of that is extremely important. I would absolutely encourage you to do it. Even if you feel like, you haven't even been in this arena before. I certainly wasn't. And now, I'm certainly not nearly as experienced as Alan, but I certainly feel like I'm at more at ease with the entire process and how that works, even after just one time.
Okay.
One thing I just add is that being involved with this is more about policy than politics.
Okay.
And that's where people often get hung up saying, well, I don't want to get involved in the politics, but this is really about policy. And by being involved in advocacy, it's really about investing in your future.
Okay. Well, and that, go ahead, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, yeah. And at no point were things contentious or, you read so many things in the media and, social media and the news and stuff like that. You feel like, oh man, this is going to be tremendously inflammatory. Like what you don't know what you're going to walk into, but at no point did I feel that way at all. It really was focused on policy, like Alan said.
Okay. Well, and talking about your last point, Alan, and this is my last question for each of you. So having had these conversations now, what are you most optimistic about for the future? What are you most excited about for the future of this industry based on the conversations that you did have there?
Well, I think the fact that the time we spent in DC, there was a lot of younger people at this event.
Sure.
And so I think, and that is encouraging that it's not just a group of old people going to DC every other year, that there are younger people involved. And I think that is good for the industry. When we go to these meetings, the industry is actually appreciated by most of these offices because you can have a good conversation about something that is good for the environment. It's good for all their constituents. People can enjoy the industry as opposed to, having a discussion with a group of people about Defense Department or something like that. So we tend to be well received. And I think that helps our industry. But I think having so many more younger people at that event, I think is a good sign that the industry, will stay involved with this type of advocacy, which is very necessary. And I think has become more necessary in the last 10, 15 years.
Sure, absolutely. Jonathan?
And kind of to call back what Alan had brought up earlier in the conversation, the number of people that are getting involved, there were really a lot of people at this event. Alan, I think it was the most that had ever attended. Is that right?
I believe so. Yeah, the 140 is a sold out event, 140 people.
And I think there was a wait list too. So, I mean, more and more people are getting involved. So you don't feel like you're alone, like you're a voice just kind of like calling out into the wind. You've got a group of people with like-minded individuals doing the same thing that you're doing. To be able to link up with them, that is really encouraging.
Okay. So you guys already looking ahead to the next event then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'll probably be in the next year or so. I'll probably be down a couple of times, probably maybe with NALP as well as AmericanHort. So there's always some other groups that have these types of events. But the AmericanHort team in DC, as Jonathan has mentioned, did a fantastic job, and they're available anytime if anyone has any questions about what's going on in DC or wants to arrange visits for their congressmen or senators to their places of work, or is in DC, even if they're just down there for another event, you can always hook up with the AmericanHort DC team and they'll spend time with you.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I will absolutely be there for the next one. I think they do it every other year.
Every other year.
So yeah, so it's just enough of a break to say, okay, let's see what's new. And so I will absolutely be at the next one. No questions asked.
Awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate each of your perspectives on an event like this. It's important, and I don't know if it gets talked about enough. Like I said at the beginning, growers like to talk about technology and varieties and all that, but this is just as important to the future of this industry, I think. So I want to thank both of you for joining me today.
Thanks very much.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. You can learn more at greenhousegrower.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave us a rating as it helps other podcast listeners find the show.